few days ago, Visa and MasterCard announced that they had reached a settlement with retailers related to interchange fees. There's a lot more behind that. We are going to dive into that and tell you what you need to know and what you can do about it. Joining us for our conversation today is Doug Kantor. He is General Counsel here at NACS, and he's involved with the Merchants Payments Coalition. He's been involved with the issue of swipe fees, interchange fees for 20 years now. So Doug is going to take us through some of the things that were announced this week and look at the broader picture. So thanks again for joining us today, Doug.
Thanks for having me.
So I mentioned, podcast roughly 20 minutes. We're going to go through 20 years of history of interchange fees in those 20 minutes. But, I had set up, there's been a lot of news this week, news reports, and they're all varying in terms of how they've described this proposed settlement. I'd like you to describe it eventually without using profanity. But first, just set up. We've heard a lot. If you're not intimately familiar with swipe fees, there was, the Durbin Amendment. We won't go that far back, but there's been opt-outs that have been related to various settlements over the years. There's been the Credit Card Competition Act that has been introduced in Congress. And then there's this settlement that, if you look at some news reports, will say it has happened, but it's actually been proposed, and it's the third one. The first two failed. I think I've done some of the talking, or too much of the talking now. So, Doug, can you just kind of lay the landscape about what this is and where it fits into the broader scheme of the past 2 decades?
Sure. So there's been litigation, as you said, for 20 years here. It's been a strange road, and one that most merchants would not recognize as being what you think of when you go to court to try to fix something. And maybe that was the mistake in the first place, is going to court to try to fix something. But set that aside, it's what happened. There have been 2 different class action settlements rejected by the courts. NACS fought both of them. There's a central problem here. This settlement, like the other ones, was not reached by merchants. It was reached by plaintiffs' lawyers who have asked the court and gotten the court's agreement that they represent every merchant in the United States with respect to Visa and MasterCard's rules. NACS fought them on that, asked for them not to be appointed as those lawyers, asked the court not to let them take those claims and our rights from us. We wanted to push all those rights ourselves, but that's not where we find ourselves. This is something called a mandatory class. No one can opt out of it. It's different, just so listeners understand, from the class that settled for money that quite a few members will hopefully at some point here get money out of. This really is just about, do you change Visa MasterCard's rules? How do you change them, et cetera? But unfortunately, this small group of lawyers gets to decide that, or at least they think they do. But all we're able to do is go to the court and say, here's what we like or don't like, and please approve it or please don't approve it. And as I said, twice before, we've gone to the court and said, don't let these settlements happen. And the court has said, okay, we agree with you.
So before we get into the latest one, my understanding is that, that twice this has been rejected by the courts. Once was last year. So they went to the well last year. The judge said, no, there's nothing here and it should not continue. And now they're back. Why so quickly and why at all?
There's a couple reasons. One is there's now a new judge. And so Visa and MasterCard think they've got another shot at this and perhaps a more promising shot. 2 is they did change some details. Some might call it window dressing, but it is a little bit different than the settlement last year, though a lot of it looks the same if you read through the document. And the last piece is Visa and MasterCard really, really want to tell their investors, the stock market, the banks that own many of their shares, hey, this is all over. There's nothing to see here. No more big fight. Go ahead and put your money with us because we're ready to roll. Completely understand that urge. It just doesn't reflect reality. Merchants are still very upset about swipe fees and how high they are and how they're set. And this settlement won't change that one way or the other.
And also, I imagine that there's, in addition to having a conversation that they want investors to hear, they want Congress to hear this, to say to Congress, hey, we solved we solved this problem. There's no need for you to get involved.
That's absolutely right. They believe that it's a good move for them to go to Congress and say, oh, we negotiated with merchants. Hey, we accommodated their concerns. Nothing to see here. You don't need to do anything. That is wrong. The huge outpouring of objections to this settlement from merchants, trade associations, and the like show that it's wrong. Frankly, it was never going to be possible because we have made clear to Congress time and again that the truth is courts are best equipped to say whether a law has been broken and to say how much somebody has to pay to make up for breaking a law, and to tell you not to do it again. Congress's job is to set the rules of the road so that markets can function. And you've got to have both of those sides of the equation, or at the very least, from our perspective, you have to have the Congress side of the equation, the saying, hey, you did stuff wrong in the past and here's the penalty for it, doesn't make the world a better place.
So let's look at the news that came out just in the last couple days. Depending upon which news source you read, depends. The headlines are written by people who are probably not that familiar with what's going on. Whatever a good headline, let's cobble together a couple quotes. I'm not saying anybody's doing the wrong job here. I'm just saying it's difficult to get inside of what is going on. So that's why we're talking to you. I've seen headlines that say Visa and MasterCard reach swipe fee settlement with merchants. I've seen things that don't talk about it as if, but that these parts of the settlement won't take effect until the court approves the settlement, not if. So walk us through this proposed settlement. And of course, as you said, the proposed settlement was between two groups of lawyers that said, we're qualified to do this. While NACS and a bunch of other merchant-focused organizations say this is a terrible idea and this should not go through. So what is the big thing that is being proposed, or the series of big things that's being proposed in this supposed swipe fee settlement?
Well, let me say a couple things there with respect to what's being proposed. But one thing we should be clear about is the lawyers supposedly for the merchants who reached this settlement stopped returning our calls or meeting with us years ago. They did not like what we had to say about what needed to be done to fix this market, and therefore they stopped listening. So that's one, and we should be clear about that. The settlement itself does a couple of big things. The central problem in the case, and the reason why litigation was filed, is that rather than having a competitive market here, Visa and MasterCard set swipe fee rates on behalf of the banks. The banks all agree, yep, whatever Visa and MasterCard say, that's what we'll charge merchants. And so that those banks are not competing on the fee rates, which they compete on every other rate. Don't know why they don't on this one, but they don't compete. And Visa and MasterCard turn to merchants and say, hey, you have to treat all these different banks with different cards as though they're the same single bank. If you want to take any card, you must take every single one of them. And that cuts off any incentive or ability for a merchant or group of merchants to, say, go to Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, you name it, and bargain them against each other and say, oh, hey, why would I do business with you? Just like our members do every day with respect to different suppliers of all kinds of goods that they sell. Here, they just don't have those normal market options. And that's where the whole system is broken down and why fees have gone up by so much. So that's the reason for the lawsuit. Rather than changing that, what the lawsuit does is say, well, if you want to reject rewards cards, we'll let you do that. And by the way, if you want to surcharge, and say I'll surcharge Visa cards or I'll surcharge MasterCards, we'll let you do that. And we'll reduce the fees by 0.1% for 5 years. How's that? That's the deal in front of us. Here's what they don't tell you. Rewards cards are most of the cards. It doesn't really help to say you have to take 0 or 100% if they're saying, well, if you don't want to take 100%, you have to reject most of them. Well, thanks. That's not so good. Surcharging's never been a real answer here. Some people use it, and good for them, but it doesn't change the market. And certainly surcharging just for Visa or MasterCard doesn't help because, again, you want the banks having to compete with each other. And finally, just so we're clear, while they've offered the 0.1% reduction in the bank's fees, the settlement says Visa and MasterCard can increase their own fees, sometimes referenced as network fees, as much as they want, anytime that they want. So that could erase the entire reduction. That's the quick version. I know there's a million questions behind it, Jeff.
So I want to go back to what you said about 2 minutes ago. These lawyers that are representing merchants haven't listened to merchants in years, yet they think that they represent merchants. That right there seems to defy some pretty incredible logic.
It's an unfortunate situation, yes. There was a time years ago when a handful of the merchant trade groups had multiple meetings with those lawyers and went through the problems with the market and what needed to be done to fix it. The lawyers did not think some of those things were achievable in a settlement. And our answer to that was, well, if they're not achievable in a settlement, have a trial. See what the court says. That's the whole point of the lawsuit, or so we thought. It was not the point of the lawsuit in their minds. And so, yeah, as I said, they stopped meeting with us. They stopped talking to us. There's actually last year, when the last settlement got rejected, there were court papers filed by the National Retail Federation and the Retail Industry Leaders Association, and they went through a lot of this history. It's eye-opening as to what can happen that I don't think anyone would believe makes sense in terms of trying to get the right outcome through a court process.
So again, going back to, this is different than the settlement. There was a settlement announced, I don't know, was it as much as a year ago, that they have, Visa and MasterCard have settled a lawsuit, and it will result in significant financial disbursement. This is totally different than that. This is only related to a settlement in how they will be able to control their own destiny without guidance for another number of years.
That's right. This is separate from the money. This is just about the rules of the road and how the credit card system gets administered, which Visa and MasterCard keep a pretty tight grip on. So this news came out on Monday
November 10th. NACS and all the other significant retail organizations immediately expressed strong opposition to this. What does NACS do next? And is there anything that our members can do as this settlement continues to be in the news?
So the next
proposed settlement.
Yes, proposed settlement. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. The next thing is we'll get a schedule from the court as to when people can file objections or support for this settlement. Usually they give folks about a month or so to do that sort of thing. And there's no question that NACS and many other groups will file objections detailing why the court ought to reject the settlement. The lawyers who negotiated the deal will obviously file papers in support, urging the court to accept the settlement. And NACS members can participate and send in their own objections at that point. And once we have a schedule and some more detail from the court, we'll be getting that information out to our members as well. If the court rejects the settlement again, that's probably the end of this one, and people will start looking toward a trial date. If the court gives the settlement what they call at that stage preliminary approval, then there will be public notice to all merchants across the country. Everyone will have a chance to comment on it, and then there will be a hearing to determine whether the court will give final approval. Now, that's probably something that would take place, next summer or next fall. There would be a lot of time there before we got to that stage. But that's the rest of the process. There could, if the settlement got final approval, there could be an appeal from there to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. But that's, now we're talking about more than a year out, and we'll see how the world changes between now and then.
So in the round 2 that was rejected by the judge, it was rejected at the preliminary stage. How soon was that after the proposed settlement was announced in round 2 before the judge rejected that? And do you see that as a potential or likely outcome?
So in that case, it was 2-3 months later after the settlement came out that the judge rejected last year's settlement at the preliminary stage. I will tell you, it's incredibly unusual for a judge to reject a settlement at the preliminary stage. It really shows how completely inadequate that settlement was. So the same thing could happen here, but I think everybody should be prepared that that was unusual. And even though this settlement is not that much better than last time, my guess is the judge would be reluctant to reject it at such an early stage before getting full, broad public comments. But we'll see.
So when you talk about public comments, and let's just say this goes down that path, as you said, and that there is no, that it goes to the public comments. For somebody who has never weighed in on something like that, what does it involve? Like, NACS will obviously communicate. We are encouraging people to provide comments. Does it involve that you have to be involved with some sort of legal expert to file comments? What would that look like?
So you don't necessarily, during that sort of public comment stage, have to file a lawyer to do it. There will be instructions as to, it's much more like writing a letter. And we'll get that information out to NACS members, other trade groups. We'll get that information out as well. But it is not that much more complicated than writing a letter. Now, I will say, folks who are serious about it and very concerned certainly can hire a lawyer and do a something more like a legal brief arguing against or even for, if they wanted to, the settlement, that's not required. It is just an option.
So we have we obviously NACS will continue to inform members, the industry, about what's going on related to this proposed settlement. The other big thing, and as we mentioned earlier, is is this smoke and mirrors to let people in Congress think that they don't need to solve the problem? We certainly don't want that, and there still is the Credit Card Competition Act. Congress is close to being back in session and being able to act on things. Is there anything that members need to do related to the CCCA, the Credit Card Competition Act, now that credit card swipe fees are in the news so much?
The Credit Card Competition Act is still out there, and there's still a ton of bipartisan support for it. The biggest obstacle, frankly, to it passing to date has been the relative dysfunction of Congress. Not a lot of things get passed in Congress these days. And so finding procedural opportunity has been challenging, but it's a challenge we think we will get over at some point. What I like to tell our members is, if you would just take 5 or 10 minutes a day, each day, to do something to help on the Credit Card Competition Act, we will win this thing easily. And those things could be pick up the phone, call your member of Congress and say, hey, this is important to my business. Here's why. Please pass it. Tell one of your colleagues, pick up the phone, call their member of Congress, make that statement. Send an email to the congressional office. Agree with us to sign an opinion piece or letter to the editor for your local paper. We'll write it. We'll help you get it placed. We'll work with you to do it. Things like that don't take a lot of time or effort, but doing a little bit every day makes a huge difference. It would be a tidal wave if folks would do those types of things. And frankly, then there's all kinds of other strategies we can talk to members about, like putting something in your loyalty app that your customers can see and click on, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of ways to make clear that this is really an important thing. And if we make that clear, we'll win.
So how does a member of Congress determine something is important? Is it the sheer number of calls, emails? Is it the percentage pro and con? How do they determine that, hey, we're really seeing something here, and it's pretty clear to my constituents that this is important?
There's quantity and quality that members of Congress look at, and some of them look at those in different proportions, let's say. There's certainly just an adding up of, how many emails or letters did we get on this side of an issue? How many did we get against it? They do keep track of those numbers in most of these offices. But it also matters, obviously, if, hey, an important local business owner talks to the member of Congress, that carries a lot of weight. So like I said, quantity and quality both matter, as do the merits of an issue. Members of Congress do actually care about whether they're doing the right thing. They think about all this stuff, but they do care about whether they're doing the right thing. And look, they've got junior staff helping them evaluate all of that along the way. Ultimately, like I said, the way each member makes decisions is a little bit different based on their sense of what their constituents want most.
So we've kind of dissected what are possible next steps with Credit Card Competition Act, what you can do, what the swipe fee settlement is and isn't, I'll give you the last word. Complete the sentence. The proposed credit card swipe fee settlement is
not a good deal for merchants and should be rejected by the courts. And it should not be used as an excuse to avoid legislation, which is ultimately what we need.
I can't think of a better ending. Thanks for joining us again today, Doug, and keep up the good fight. And all of you listening, join Doug and team, the NACS GR team, in this fight, and together we'll win. So thanks for joining us again today, Doug.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.